They say when the night grows still, the trees begin their own murmurs, voices carried on a breeze too cold for comfort. Tonight, as embers dance beneath an ink-black sky, you will hear stories passed down in hushed tones. Tales of those who swore they were never alone beneath these boughs. Listen closely, for the forest does not forgive, and every rustle may be more than a branch snapping. Somewhere in the darkness, something darker was lurking, something far more menacing than memory or myth. And by the end of this half-minute, you will realize the only thing more frightening than what you hear is what remains unheard. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake. They leave without subscribing. And by doing that, they miss out on the creepiest, most terrifying stories that only true horror fans get to experience. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now, because tonight's journey is only just beginning and the darkness has much more to reveal. Where are you watching from and what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here the night is still young and the terror is waiting to unfold. Now let's begin. The fire has shrunk to glowing coals, barely lighting the mossy ground beneath us. Around the clearing, shadows stretch between tall pine trunks, reaching like silent fingers into the dark. In the summer of 1982, two friends, Alex and Maya, made camp here. They unpacked their bags, boiled water for coffee, then sat by the fire sharing stories until the stars appeared overhead. After their meal, they slipped into their sleeping bags, lulled by the crackle of embers and the chorus of night insects. But when dawn broke, the sight was eerily still. Alex's hiking boots sat neatly by the tent entrance. Maya's backpack rested where she'd left it. Their water bottles lay on the ground, untouched. The tent flap hung open, revealing nothing but empty sleeping bags. No footprints led away. No rustle of underbrush marked their path. It was as if they'd simply dissolved into the air. Since that morning, locals warn all who venture here to leave before dark. They claim the pines themselves begin to speak, not with the wind, but with soft, urgent words carried on a cool breeze. Campers awake to their own names whispered, just beyond the circle of firelight. Some say they hear a plea, "Help me," drifting through the branches. A few even swear they've heard two voices arguing, as though trapped in a desperate fight. Over the years, curious visitors have returned, cameras in hand and nerves steeled for a thrill. Each one left well before sunrise, shaken by what they heard. One woman told of hearing her mother's name called in a child's voice. A man insisted laughter drifted from the treeline. Laughter that was too sharp, too cold to be human. All spoke of the same low hum rising from the pines, a sound that felt like an old warning. Tonight, we sit in that same spot. The air is heavy with smoke and the scent of damp pine needles. The coals crackle under a starless sky. Every small sound feels magnified. Every rustle in the branches feels like danger. Keep your ears open. Listen to the pines. They hold the last words of Alex and Maya. And if you hear a voice in the dark, remember, it could be more than a whisper. It could be your warning. After the first night's disappearance, Alex and Maya arrived at this clearing knowing the stories. They'd heard the warnings in the nearest town, that people who stayed here after dusk sometimes never made it to dawn. Still, they set up camp with a deliberate calm. Maya's headlamp beam cut a bright line through the dark as she threaded the tent zipper closed. Inside, they whispered plans for the next day's hike over mugs of hot coffee, the steam swirling in the cool air. But as the ember glow faded, something else joined them. At first, it was almost soothing, a soft scuff in the brush, like a deer stepping lightly through fallen cones. Alex glanced toward the tree line, where shadows pressed close. He called out, "Did you hear that?" Maya only shook her head, her voice tight as she tried to laugh it off. The footsteps came again, closer this time. Each crack of a twig sounded like a warning. Alex shone his flashlight into the darkness, but all he saw was a wall of trunk and needle-covered ground. He snapped the light off, unwilling to disturb whatever watched them. Then the tent zipper moved. A gentle zip zipped back and forth, as though an unseen hand were testing the fabric. Maya froze, her breath catching in her throat. Alex reached to zip it closed, but his fingers passed through empty air. The zip stopped only when he tugged hard, and the silence returned. A single pine needle drifted down, landing with an echo that rang louder than any shout. In that moment, Alex and Maya realized they weren't alone. The forest was listening, and something was inching closer. With the zipper slammed shut and the forest closing in, Alex reached into his pack and pulled out a small voice recorder. The red light blinked on, its soft glow a beacon in the pitch-black tent. He tapped the record button and held the device toward the mesh window, as if coaxing the trees to speak. At first, there was only the crackle of embers and the buzz of far-off insects. Then came a sound that froze Alex's blood, a faint but clear whisper. It was Maya's voice, shaky and urgent. "Alex! Alex, please." The words drifted through the darkness, punctuated by a long pause, then a second, more desperate plea. "Help me, don't leave me." Alex's flashlight darted toward the tree line, its beam slicing through the underbrush. Shadows twisted and recoiled as if hiding something moving just beyond the light. He climbed out of the tent, recorder in hand, and called Maya's name. No answer returned, only the soft rustle of needles underfoot. Heart pounding, Alex pressed deeper among the trunks. Each step snapped a twig. Each breath seemed too loud. He switched the recorder off, but the whispers continued, softer now, like a distant conversation. He backed away, hands shaking, and stumbled back into the clearing. Maya was safe inside the tent, pale and wide-eyed. She never heard her own voice. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear. Alex replayed the tape again and again, but every time, the hiss and muffled static were all he heard. By dawn, the red light on the recorder blinked off. He pressed play once more. The tape was blank. Not a single whisper remained. As first light crept through the pines, they packed in terrified silence. Alex slipped the recorder into his pocket, staring at it as if it had betrayed him. The forest held its secrets close, and let none leave behind a single proof. Later that morning, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something followed them. He retrieved his handheld video camera, determined to capture any sign of the forest's secret. The lens tracked over gnarled trunks, low-hanging branches, and a thick carpet of needles. Every time the wind whispered, the branches seemed to shift as though alive. Behind a cluster of pines, Alex spotted it, a branch twisted into the shape of a face. Its eyes gaped in hollow circles, lips curved into a silent scream. Mesmerized, he stepped closer, camera held at chest height. The air grew colder. His breath puffed out in front of him. With each step, the ground underfoot softened, as if the forest itself wanted him to stay. He raised the camera, zooming into the wooden visage. The mouth quivered, though there was no wind. A low growl rumbled through the clearing, the sound coming from deep within the trees. Alex's heart thundered in his ears. He whispered Maya's name, but the growl answered. It grew louder, shaking the branches overhead. The camera shook as Alex's hand trembled. His flashlight flickered off, plunging him into darkness. The growl swelled into a guttural roar. Alex raised the camera higher, straining to capture the source. Suddenly, a long, gnarled finger of bark snapped forward, brushing the lens. The camera slipped from his grasp. Hand over eyes, Alex lunged to catch it, but the shape melted back into the tangle of branches. The roar cut short, replaced by a final, bone-chilling whisper, his name, and then blackness. When rescuers arrived hours later, they found only the abandoned camera lying among the coals. Its battery was dead, but upon charging it back at the ranger station, they pressed play. The screen flickered to life, revealing Alex's trembling hands, the camera's view of the twisted face in the pines. Then the device slipped from his grasp. The last frame froze on two terrified eyes reflected in the dark lens, wide and unblinking. Yet when they checked the audio track, there was only silence, no growls, no whispers, no proof of what Alex saw. Rangers found no footprints leading away. No blood, no sign of Alex or Maya. The clearing lay as it always did, silent, empty, unchanged. Only the camera remained, its images a haunting question with no answer. They searched for Alex and Maya for days, but the forest yielded no trace. Weeks later, someone dared to return the camera to the clearing, placing it where Alex first filmed the face. They said the embers there still glowed faintly, as if fed by something more than wood. Tonight, we passed that same camera from hand to hand, each of us staring at the frozen eyes. We light our fire on the same ground where Alex and Maya vanished. And as the flames flicker, consider this. The forest may grant you a glimpse of its depths, but it keeps its truth beyond any human voice. They found only the camera. Its last frame showed two terrified eyes among the pines. Yet the tape played nothing but silence. Ben and Lila set up their campsite on the edge of a quiet shore. By day, the waves lapped gently at the sand, and the sun warmed the driftwood scattered along the beach. They pitched their tent near a cluster of smooth rocks, and the sea breeze carried the taste of salt and promise. But when night falls and the tide pulls back, something else arrives. It begins as a thin ribbon of mist that crawls along the wet sand. Seconds later, it swells into a wall of gray that rises faster than any storm cloud. Locals call it the midnight mist. They warn that if you stay past sunset, the fog will find you. And when it does not let go. In 1994, 3 friends camped here under a full moon. They laughed around their fire, roasting marshmallows and daring one another to walk the shoreline in the dark. When they returned, the beach was empty. Their fire was out. Their tents were gone. The only sign they had been here was a single footprint pressed into damp sand, and it led straight into the mist. Tonight, we stand in that same spot, feeling the chill roll in with each passing wave. The ocean's roar fades as the fog creeps closer, swallowing sound and sight alike. You can almost taste the damp air as it slides over your skin, hiding the world beyond a few steps. Keep your eyes on the waterline. Watch the edge of the mist as it creeps forward. Somewhere in that haze, unseen hands could be waiting to pull you into silence. When the tide retreats, a blanket of mist rolls back. In it, campers vanish without trace. Ben laughed when the old fisherman warned him and Lila to pack up before midnight. "It's just fog," he said, tossing another log onto the fire. Lila stared into the dancing flames, her smile forced. She'd read every tale about the midnight mist, but she refused to let fear drive her away. The sky overhead was clear, stars scattered like pinpricks of silver. The sea breeze was cool, but not enough to make them shiver. Every 10 minutes, a distant foghorn groaned, its sound swallowed almost immediately by the sound of waves. A voice drifted over the dunes, half carried by the wind. "Leave now, it comes soon." But the words were almost lost in the darkness. Ben and Lila told themselves the warnings were superstition. They had supplies, a reliable tent, and a fire that crackled defiantly. As the clock edged closer to midnight, they felt a thrill, like walking the edge of a dream. Lila pulled on her jacket and offered Ben a thermos of hot coffee, her breath steaming in the cold air. Behind them, the fog crept forward, a silent tide of gray that swallowed the shoreline. At first, it was thin and wispy, curling around driftwood and seaweed. But with every passing minute, it thickened, swirling in low clouds that dragged wet sand in its wake. The fire's glow dimmed as the mist slid over the embers, sending tendrils of moisture upward. Lila shivered and tugged at her scarf. Ben leaned in closer to the flames, his eyes scanning the edge of the haze. Minutes before midnight, the fog surged like a living thing, hugging the sand and blocking out the stars. Every sound faded except for the distant foghorn and the steady hiss of mist on embers. A single voice drifted again, clearer this time. "Go before it's too late." Lila grabbed Ben's arm, her heart hammering. He shrugged off her grip, determined to stay. The mist rolled around them now, cold and heavy, pressing in from all sides. The world beyond the fire was gone. All that remained was the thick gray wall inching closer. And still, Ben and Lila refused to leave. At exactly 11 minutes past midnight, Ben switched off the campfire to test the fog's hush. Darkness closed in immediately. He flicked on his flashlight, the narrow beam slicing through heavy vapor. Lila reached for his hand, voice shaking. "Ben, you see that?" He followed her gaze to the sand just beyond their blankets. Footprints, smaller than theirs, led straight toward the tent. Each print was deep, as if someone heavy had pressed their boots into the wet ground. But the tide had retreated hours ago. No one could have walked here without leaving a trail back to the water. Ben crouched down, running a finger along the edge of a single print. The sand around it was impossibly still, no wind blowing, no animals stirring. Their own track stopped at the fire pit. These footprints started outside the glow of the embers and moved inward, as though something had approached them in secret. A soft, muffled voice drifted through the fog, so faint Ben barely heard it. It sounded like Lila's cry, calling his name in panic. "Ben, help me." The words came again, softer, as if too exhausted to carry further. He swung the flashlight beam into the mist, but saw only pale gray. Each sweep revealed another set of prints, each one closer than the last. Lila shivered and whispered, "We should go." But Ben stood frozen, torn between fear and fascination. He raised his camera to capture the prints, hoping to prove what they both sensed. This wasn't natural fog. Then a twig snapped behind them. Lila yanked her hand free, spinning around. Nothing moved but mist swirling in the beam. Her breath hitched. Ben's flashlight flickered just as the prints paused at the tent flap, as if whoever, or whatever, had come was deciding whether to enter. A low, distant call sounded. a wordless moan that grew closer with each heartbeat. Lila backed away, tangled in her scarf. The prints vanished into the fog, swallowed by the gray wall that held them in place. In that silence, broken only by their ragged breathing, one truth sank in. They were not alone. Something had stepped out of the mist, and it was already inside the circle of their light. Ben's flashlight trembled in his grip as he stared into the gray sea of mist. Every breath felt like ice in his lungs. Lila pressed close, her eyes wide and unblinking. The prints had stopped, just beyond their small circle of light. Then, from the heart of the fog, a shape began to take form. At first, it was nothing more than a shudder in the haze, a dark ripple that moved without sound. But as it drew nearer, its outline sharpened into a high-contrast silhouette. It stood taller than any person, its shoulders rounded and its head capped in a smooth curve. There were no features, no eyes, nose, or mouth, just pale, unblemished surface that seemed to glow faintly against the darkness. Ben swallowed hard. He raised the flashlight higher, but the beam passed straight through the creature's body, illuminating the mist behind it. He fumbled for his camera, hands shaking, desperate to record proof. Lila grabbed his arm, her nails digging in. A soft dragging sound reached them, like wet fabric being pulled across sand. They watched, paralyzed, as the shape moved forward, dragging behind it a mound of something dark and formless. It left prints too deep for the wet sand and stamped out a path of shadow. The dragging grew louder, a wet, slurping rhythm that matched the thump of Ben's heart. Then a scream burst from the fog, a tortured, gasping cry that split the night. It sounded like Lila's voice, but twisted and broken. The shape paused, head tilting as if listening. For a heartbeat, the mist relaxed its grip around the creature, and Ben caught a glimpse of something writhing behind it. Limbs or roots, he couldn't tell. Without warning, the fog surged forward like a living tide, swallowing both the shape and its burden. The scream was cut short, snatched away by the wall of gray. In the instant before darkness reclaimed the clearing, Ben saw the silhouette stretch toward him, arm-length fingers brushing through the mist. And then the world went black. When first light broke, the fog retreated as silently as it had appeared. Rescuers, drawn by frantic calls on the radio, arrived to find the campfire reduced to cold ashes. Lila was gone. All that remained was Ben, collapsed beside the tent, his clothes torn and face streaked with fear. His eyes glowed with a distant emptiness. They lifted him onto a stretcher, voices gentle but urgent. He sat up suddenly, gaze fixed on the empty morning air, and whispered so softly they leaned in to hear. It wasn't alone. His words trailed off into a whisper no one else could catch. Questions came fast. Where was Lila? What had they seen? Ben could offer no answers. Only that the mist had given form to something that should not exist. A pale shape that moved just beyond understanding, dragging shadows behind it. He spoke of a cry that ended in a silence, so complete it felt alive. Search parties scoured the shoreline and dunes for days, but found no trace of Lila, or of any footprints leading away. Only Ben's footprints remained, interrupted by the late-night prints of that unseen other. They faded at the water's edge, as though the mist itself had licked them clean. In the ranger station, investigators played back Ben's camera, only to find the tape blank. No silhouettes, no screams, no proof of the terror he had described. Just static. Weeks later, a local fisherman passing the clearing noticed something half buried in sand near the driftwood. A single, pale footprint, deeper than any human's. Beneath it, the wet sand was smooth and unbroken, as if the mist had pressed its hand one last time, leaving behind a warning. Tonight, they tell the tale of Camp Midnight Mist, of Ben's haunted eyes and Lila's absence, and of a sound no recording could capture. And as the fog rolls in once more, remember, sometimes, being the only one left to tell the story is the real horror. In the spring of 1995, a lone figure wandered off the trail just before dusk. His name was David Mercer, an experienced hiker who never left the path, until that night. Search teams gathered at the ranger station, each member equipped with maps, radios, and headlamps. But as they moved into the forest, one light outshone them all, a single swinging lantern. At first, it was just a glow in the distance, bobbing between trees like a will-o'-the-wisp. The team followed its rhythm, step, pause, step, pulled forward by the hope that David still held it in his hand. Hours passed, and the beam cut through the thick undergrowth, casting long, dancing shadows. Muffled calls of David echoed into the darkness, but the only reply was the lantern's sway. Then, suddenly, the lantern's glow blinked out. The team stopped in mid-step, hearts pounding as the forest fell into a black so deep it felt solid. No call answered. No lantern light guided the way. Only the soft rustle of leaves and the snap of a twig underfoot broke the silence. When they switched on their own lights, there was no sign of David, only his footprints, clear against the damp earth, leading toward an overgrown thicket. The lantern lay on the ground, its glass cracked and handle twisted, as though it had been dropped in terror. No one could explain why the light vanished or where David had gone. Tonight, we stand at the edge of that same thicket. Our lantern swings in the wind, its flame flickering against the black backdrop of ancient oaks. The beam cuts narrow paths through the brush, but beyond its glow lies only questions. Follow us into the dark, where a single lantern once guided a hiker, and listen for the reason his light stayed behind. Ranger Martin Hayes led the main search party that night. He's guided hundreds of hikers back to safety, but he says he's never felt eyes on him like that evening. In a recorded interview years later, his voice still trembles when he describes it. "We were moving slow," he says, following David's footprints. "Every time I raised my flashlight, the beam caught a pair of eyes staring back at me from the brush." He pauses, as if reliving the moment. "They'd vanish when I blinked. Then I'd hear it, a soft sigh, like someone exhaling behind me." The team pressed on, calling David's name. An owl hooted from high in the branches, its cry echoing like an alarm. Martin remembers the silence that swallowed the hoot, a silence so complete it twisted their own voices into distant echoes. Then came the twig snap. It sounded close, too close. He swung his light toward the sound, but the beam picked up nothing but empty leaves shaking in the wind. His heart pounded so loud, he was sure David had fallen, crying out for help. Instead, all he found were more footprints, smaller ones, leading away from the trail. "I felt every hair on my neck stand up," Martin says. "It wasn't just the wind. I felt someone breathing behind me." He turned fast, but the beam of his flashlight hit only darkness. No sign of a body, no sign of David, just the pounding of his own pulse and the forest humming in the background. As the team huddled and debated whether to call for backup, Martin recalls a whisper on the wind, so soft he thought he imagined it. "Help me." He froze, every instinct screaming to run. But the forest held him in place with unseen hands. That night, they lost their guide. David's lantern was the last thing anyone saw, and the first thing to disappear. As the search party pressed on, the riverbank still out of sight, something impossible happened. Despite a steady breeze blowing from the north, the lantern swung eastward, its dull flame bobbing like a heartbeat in the gloom. Ranger Hayes reached out, yanking on the handle, but it slipped through his gloved fingers as if the light had a life of its own. The wind should have pushed the flame backward, but instead it led them forward, into thickets so dense the rescuers had to part the branches by hand. Every step sank into damp earth, every branch snagged their gear. Yet they followed, trance-like, guided by that bobbing glow. The night vision camera captured their pale faces, eyes wide, lips pressed tight against the cold. Each man and woman in the party felt it, a silent tug at the heart. Their radios crackled with static and unspoken fears. When someone asked if they should turn back, no one spoke. Instead, they marched deeper. The mist in their breath hung in the beam, swirling at their feet. Then they heard it, a soft, wet thud each time the lantern struck the ground, as though something metal dragged behind. They strained to see what trailed the light, but all that appeared was darkness thicker than any shadow. A snap to the left made them jump. The beam of the flashlight skimmed a patch of bare earth, revealing footprints leading away from the lantern's path. They were too small to belong to an adult and too deep to be a child's. Ranger Hayes shone his light on the trees, nothing but gnarled bark and twisted roots. The lantern's glow turned down a narrow game trail. Rescuers followed single file, branches clawing at their jackets. With every step, the forest grew quieter. The usual night chorus of insects and frogs fell silent, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. And then, somewhere ahead, the lamp's flame flickered once and vanished, plunging them into a darkness so complete they could see the shape of their own fear. They stumbled out of the trees just as the lantern's light winked out. Ranger Hayes cursed as he lunged forward, but the lantern slipped free of his grasp. It tumbled down a sloping bank, striking each stone with a hollow clang that rang through the night. The team froze, hearts pounding. The forest noise, already hushed, fell away completely. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant bird call, only the echo of metal on rock. Ranger Hayes scanned the darkness with his flashlight, but all it revealed was the steep drop toward the river's edge. Then, from below came the splash, deep, resonant like a body entering cold water. It rippled across the glassy surface, swallowing every other sound. A shiver ran through the rescuers, and they knew without speaking that something had fallen with the lantern. A child's laugh, high and empty, echoed inland, then faded as quickly as it came. A single droplet of water dripped from a leaf above, falling into the river with a ping so sharp it felt like a whip crack. One by one, the rescuers edged toward the bank. Their feet sank into soggy soil. Their breaths came in quick bursts. Each step brought them closer to the water, but when they leaned over to peer into the black current, there was nothing. No lantern, no body, no sign of footprints on the smooth stones below. Ranger Hayes signaled the team to hold. He felt the hairs on his arms stand on end. Just then, the river delivered one final message. A small, empty lantern lid bobbed to the surface, drifting toward the bank before slipping beneath a mound of mist. And then the forest exhaled, releasing them from its grip, and plunging them back into a silence more terrifying than any scream. They never found David Mercer. No trace of him ever surfaced. Search parties combed the river and surrounding woods for days, but each lantern recovered was always extinguished. Hundreds of them, draped like ragged ghosts across the gravel bars. The riverbed seemed to yield lantern after lantern, each one blanketed in wet sand, as if someone left a message they couldn't speak. Weeks later, a local patron found a discarded boot on a log by the waterline. Inside, they discovered a folded scrap of paper, a single word scrawled in trembling script: follow. No signature, no date, just that command, stained with mud and blood. To this day, they leave lanterns at the riverbank, an offering or a warning. Each new lantern lights on its own just before midnight, as if ignited by unseen hands. Campers hear it, a faint glow bobbing in the fog, drifting away into the darkness. They watch, transfixed, until the light winks out, and they never see it again. David Mercer's lantern remains the first, the brightest, and the only one ever found with its lid floating free. Tonight, as you hear this story, imagine that glow in the mist. If it appears to you, do not move toward it. Do not follow its pull, because once the light vanishes, you become part of the darkness it leaves behind. The fire ring sat empty for years, half buried in fallen needles and ash. No one dared light flames here, until Olivia and Marcus came with their packs and sleeping bags. They picked up logs from the edge of the clearing and stacked them in a tidy circle of stones. Olivia struck a match. The kindling caught almost instantly, flames licking the wood with a hungry glow. But this place holds a story. Decades ago, a logger named Harris set these pines on fire after a bitter fight over land rights. Neighbors watched from the ridge as his rage turned forest to cinder. He disappeared into the blaze, leaving nothing but a scorched stump and the echo of his screams. Some say his spirit never left, that every ember here carries a piece of his anger. As the flames crackle, people swear they hear a low whistle on the wind, the same tune Harris whistled while he burned the woods. They say the embers flare blue when his spirit stirs, then snap back to red, as if snuffed by an unseen hand. Campers report logs shifting on their own, sparks rising higher than the fire should allow. Tonight, the air is still. Marcus leans forward, poking the coals, and the flames flare bright for a heartbeat, blue at the edges before settling back. Olivia senses something watching from just beyond the firelight. Every spark that drifts up seems to hang in midair, held by some force she can't name. Watch the coals. Listen for that whistle. Keep your hands close to the warmth, because they say the flame never dies when injustice haunts the woods. Tonight, you'll understand why. Olivia and Marcus chose this clearing because it was easy ground, flat, open, ringed by ancient stumps that marked where pines once stood. As they unloaded their gear, the wind picked up, sending brittle leaves skittering across the clearing like restless spirits. Olivia spread out a tarp while Marcus carried logs to the center, stacking them carefully between rusted metal rings that once held heavier beams. The night air was colder here, their breaths visible in front of them. Marcus paused, tracing his fingers over deep gouges in the stone that formed the fire ring, remnants of heavy chainsaws that tore through this forest decades ago. He remembered the stories, how loggers raced machines through stands of pines, the roar of engines drowning out birdsong. The way wood splintered and fell in thunderous crashes. Olivia struck a match, its spark a brief flare in the darkness. The kindling caught quickly, flames licking the dry tinder. They settled on logs thick with old sap, and the fire roared to life, its heat pushing back the chill that clung to the ground. Yet as the flames climbed the wood, the echo of a chainsaw seemed to ripple through the air, soft at first, then louder, as though the past itself was roaring back to life. Marcus leaned forward, poking embers with a stick. A gust of wind rattled the tree branches overhead, sounding like distant metal against bark. Olivia zipped up the tent, her gloved hand pausing as a sharp breeze sent a swirl of dead leaves into their circle of light. She glanced toward the stumps at the edge of the clearing, half expecting to see shadows moving where trees once stood. The fire crackled, its glow revealing empty cut marks on the stumps, evidence of lives uprooted without mercy. Marcus and Olivia exchanged a look, the memory of those chainsaws echoing in both their minds. They settled into their chairs, wrapped in blankets, staring at the flames that seemed to burn hotter here, as if feeding on the land's old violence. And when the wind died down, the forest grew so still it sounded alive, like the clearing itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Olivia awoke before dawn, her sleep broken by a faint glow across the clearing. Marcus lay curled beside her, breathing deeply. She slipped out of the tent, blanket around her shoulders, and walked toward the fire ring. The logs had cooled to charcoal hours ago, yet now, ember veins glowed crimson beneath a thin layer of ash. A soft hiss rose as unseen heat stoked the coals back to life. She knelt beside the fire, placing a hand near the embers to feel the heat. The temperature rose as if someone had recently stirred the coals. No sticks had been added. No wind had kicked up. The flames danced higher, flickering in an unnatural shade of blue before settling back to orange. Olivia's heart pounded. This was more than stray embers catching. Behind her, Marcus emerged, rubbing his eyes in confusion. "I didn't add wood," he whispered. His voice cracked against the silence. They both watched as the embers shifted, forming shapes that looked deliberate. Small piles of ash moved as if brushed by invisible hands. As they leaned in, letters emerged, deep grooves carved in the glowing coals. First an H, then an A, then an R, and finally an R, followed by I and S. Harris's name lay spelled out in fresh embers, each character glowing like a burning scar. The air grew thick, the faint smell of char and bitter smoke filling their nostrils. A sudden gust swept through the clearing, rattling leaves and stirring the fire into a frenzy. Sparks shot upward, hovering before drifting down like drops of red rain. Marcus grabbed Olivia's arm, and together they stepped back, watching their own names written in flame. They heard a chorus of whispers weaving through the trees, soft syllables carrying anger and sorrow in equal measure. Then silence. The wind died. The embers cooled, the letters fading into a flat gray. The fire went dark. All that remained was the echo of Harris's name, and the knowledge that the land still remembered his fury. In that moment, Olivia and Marcus understood. Some injustices never die, and some flames reignite on their own. As the last ember letters faded, the air shifted. Olivia and Marcus stepped back, hearts hammering. The fire burned low, coals glowing with a dull red afterglow. Then, without warning, the coals flared back to life, brighter, hotter, casting grotesque shadows on the surrounding stumps. From the center of the flames, a shape began to rise. At first it looked like a swirl of smoke, then it hardened into a figure taller than any man. Its body was pale and featureless, as if carved from stone. It hovered a few inches above the coals, arms outstretched, head tilted back in silent agony. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as the figure opened a mouth that made no sound, yet a cry tore through the night. It was a raw, broken scream full of pain and rage, like metal being crushed underfoot. The sound rattled the roots beneath their feet and set the trees trembling. Marcus clutched Olivia's hand, nails biting into her skin. Then came the chains. They rattled like 1,000 links dragged across rock. The spirit's arms jerked downward, and fragments of rusty chain clattered into the coals, glowing red-hot before cooling in midair. Each link seemed to stretch into the forest, binding the trees themselves in a network of cold steel. The form leaned forward, its invisible eyes fixing on the campers. In a voice like grinding metal, it spoke a single word: justice. The air vibrated with that word, and the ground beneath them shook. Olivia felt the weight of every fallen tree, every life destroyed by Harris's greed. She stumbled backward, heart racing as the spirit pointed a shaking finger at her and Marcus. For a moment, time stood still. The scream faded into a low hum. The chains dropped from the flames and clattered to the ring of stones. Then the figure dissolved into smoke, drifting upward in a spiral before vanishing into the night sky. The flames died in one last hiss, leaving only the echo of its cry. By dawn, the fire had burned itself to cold ash. Olivia and Marcus sat on overturned logs, their faces pale and eyes wide with disbelief. All night they had heard that scream, felt the chains rattle around their camp, and watched the spirit of Harris rise from the embers to demand his due. Now the clearing lay silent, the air heavy with the smell of spent smoke and damp earth. They rose slowly, half expecting the fire to reignite on its own. Instead, they found the ashes undisturbed, except for fresh marks on the stones. In neat rows, scratch marks cut into each rock spelled out a single word: sorry. The letters looked carved, as if a million tiny claws had etched an apology into the fire ring. Olivia knelt to trace the letters with her fingertips. The grooves were deep and cold, though the stones had cooled long ago. She pressed harder and felt the vibration of the ground, as if the forest itself shivered at that word. Marcus ran his hand along the outer rim and found more words on a nearby stump: forgive me. In that moment, they realized Harris had used his own vengeance to deliver a final message. His spirit lingered not to harm them, but to admit his guilt. The same fire that destroyed him had carried his apology across decades. As they packed their gear in stunned silence, Olivia looked back at the ring of stones. The forest was still, but she could almost hear a faint whisper on the breeze, a soft thank you. They left the clearing with heavy hearts, the words burned forever into their memories. And though the embers died, the apology remained, a final spark of peace among the ashes of revenge. Which story chilled you to the bone? Drop your choice in the comments, share your own campfire encounter, and don't forget to subscribe for more true tales from the edge of darkness.